All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. One of the things I've been trying to do lately is branch out in terms of who I'm having on the podcast. Well, at least a few times every year, I post something saying like, who should I have on the show? Who wants to be on the show? Who are you all listening to that should be on the podcast? And I really get some interesting suggestions from artists themselves and from listeners who just have people they want to introduce me to and want to hear more about. So this interview I think came up around the same time I was putting the word out there asking for who would I would want to hear on the podcast. And so you reached out, we got in touch. It's very cool this is happening, and I think the best way to start this off is how I usually do it, and have the guests introduce themselves and give a bit of background about what you do as an artist.
Okay. My name is Leigh Lugosi. I am a multidisciplinary artist and musician, making sound work at the moment under the name Góra. You say it with the tapped R, like nah. I don't know. People say Góra, and it's like that's fine. But if you want to say it properly, it's Góra.
Góra.
It's Polish. Yeah, exactly. You got it. It means mountain. It was sort of chosen arbitrarily. I wanted a moniker that sort of sounded like it could be a name, but it had a meaning relating to nature. So
Okay.
that was what I picked. Yeah, I've done a lot of different things in terms of art. I've bounced around from like photo-based work to film, like video, and I don't know. I'm never doing the same thing. I'm always doing many different things. So
Cool. Well, and I think that the first time I ever saw your name was photo related. I think that seems to be sort of what you're. I don't know if it's what you're known for entirely, but I think within the local music scene and stuff, you're probably best known as a photographer. Is that fair to say?
yeah, I think so. I think I did that the longest and was involved in the community in that sort of capacity for the longest time as sort of like a visual artist
Okay.
using a camera. Yeah.
So at that point, when you were sort of immersed in that, were you already making music, or was this something that came later?
Well, I had I've been making music for a really, really long time.
Okay.
Whether I was like a teenager in like a terrible band, which absolutely happened.
I had a few of
Um,
those too. Yeah, even
oh
beyond
my
teenager
God.
age. So yeah, I get it. I get it.
Oh, so bad. um, to messing around on my own and being in basement bands that never went anywhere and
Yeah.
things like that. And only over the last, I don't know, like 2, 3 years have I been like really putting energy into it. So on my own, at least.
Okay. Is that
Mhm.
was this like a pandemic project? Just because that timeline sort of lines up with when everyone was, the main jobs everyone had kind of weren't possible in a lot of cases, and I feel like a lot of people tried new things just because of the enforced sort of time off from what they were doing before.
Yeah, I mean it's not, but I mean in going back in time a little bit to 2017, I made my first sort of demo, I guess under what would become this project.
Okay.
Um, and in the pandemic, I picked up that demo, re-recorded it, and was using it as sort of a soundscape for visual art, like to accompany visual art. So I always think of art as having like many different sort of dimensions. Like you can have a photograph, but you can also have a sound to accompany it.
Sure.
And so I was using that demo to accompany some visual work. And that's where that was at in like 2020. And then I kind of put it down and picked it up and put it down. And, all the while I've been good friends with Brett Peranto. I don't know if you know Brett.
Yeah, I have a few of
Yeah.
his tapes. Yeah, I don't know him personally, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So Brett has been a champion of mine for a really long time. And I really value his support and his opinion. And he was always kind of bugging me to make a tape. And we made something together. I think it was, when did it come out? 2022.
Okay.
So I suppose it is sort of a pandemic thing. It sort of evolved through the pandemic, but it definitely wasn't because of it.
That's a good answer. So this is the question that no one likes answering, and I hate asking it too. But how do you define sort of the sound of what you're doing, and especially with something like what you're doing? It's not as obvious as being like, oh, I'm in a country band or whatever, right? I mean, this is very much more. kind of nebulous as far as what it actually is. Do you have a sort of a short form way that you describe it? If people say, "Oh, I hear you have a tape out," like what's on the tape?
Yeah, I'm sort of workshopping that right now because what I really want to say is like ambient Americana,
Okay.
ambient country. The ambient country thing is kind of coming with like future releases, but I'm reticent to like say that off the hop to people when they ask because I think there's like some like odd connotations with those genres
Yeah,
and like how could they possibly like intersect with an abstract or like ambient, but you know, the instrumentation in country music and in Americana music lends itself so well to abstraction,
sure.
specifically instruments such as the lap steel, which I play, and the pedal steel, which I desperately want to play. Um, those instruments are like ripe for blowing up. So now when people ask, I say that, but then I try to like over explain it because it's like ambient country, what could that possibly mean? So yeah.
Well, that's an interesting combination, I think, because you were talking earlier about sort of having art having these different facets, and there's the visual part and then the soundtrack to it, and then you know country music and a lot of the instrumentation, especially like pedal steel and that kind of stuff, it definitely has a very cinematic kind of vibe to it. I mean, especially when it's this sort of slow, long, drawn out sounds. It totally has that. Like you could see a movie happening with listening to that instrument, especially if it's altered or edited or affects in some way. And country in general too is very very storytelling style of music. And so even without the lyrics, I mean, lyrics obviously help, but even instrumental country music, it's very good at, I think, establishing a place and a narrative. And so it kind of makes sense that it would, in a weird way, it would work with sort of more abstract ambient stuff.
Absolutely. And it's funny, like the more I learn about this genre of music, because I came into making this music completely alone without even knowing anything like it existed. And I'm not saying that definitely not saying I invented anything, but I was doing my thing. And, finally looked up like ambient country question mark, in whether it was Spotify or like Google or something. I don't know where
Yeah,
I was at, but it's like, does this exist? And boy, howdy, does it exist. Like, it's amazing what people are doing with this genre of music and the way it defies so many different boundaries. There's a podcast called Ambient Country, just
okay.
called that, by a member of the band Sus, and they are one of my now biggest inspirations. I only discovered them like, I don't know, 6 weeks ago.
Right
But
on.
this podcast, I mean, for someone that makes a podcast about music, you would love it because
Yeah, I'm gonna
really,
gonna check it out.
definitely, because he he will like, sorry, I need to think about how to say this. He'll do an intro, and then it'll just be like music. He'll play a bunch of tracks and then like interject with a fact or two and then keep playing music. And every episode sort of focuses either on a different instrument or, these are artists that are using pedal steel in an interesting way, blah, blah, blah. It's so freaking cool.
Yeah, so I'm gonna look that up. I'm always looking for new music podcasts too. So that's awesome. Um, what
Mm-hmm.
is, what kind of goes into the composition of this stuff you're making? Because again, it's not as sort of direct as, I mean, take like just a standard country song, for example. There's a very direct structure to it that I don't necessarily hear in what you're doing. There may be a structure that I'm not picking up on, but what is sort of the process of writing and composing and then recording this stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I first started, the very early stages of this music, I was working with a friend who is a producer because I wasn't self-sufficient yet. I didn't have gear. I didn't have really much of anything. I had like vague ideas. I had like gestures towards a possible music, and he kind of showed me the way. Um, but since then, I've, invested and gotten instruments and acquired gear. And so my process has changed quite a bit from leaning on a pal for a
Yeah,
lot of knowledge to like actually knowing what I'm doing. So it is possible. I was a total idiot before. I kind of know things now. As far as my songwriting process, I guess, now goes, it all kind of starts with a drone. And whether I create that, using a synthesizer or lap steel, or I don't know, what else do I use? I use guitar sometimes. It starts with that. And I will often take that drone and cut it up and sample it, because I say drone as if it's like a flat piece of sound. There's often still imperfections.
Sure, yeah.
There's things that waver, and I'm not a sound expert, but I'll take a piece of a drone that I like, and I'll copy and paste it, copy and paste it, copy and paste it, until I have, I don't know, like 5 minutes or so worth of drone.
Okay.
And then I kind of keep doing that. I'll like make maybe a higher drone and sample it and do that again. And to create melody, I'm often noodling, like on lap steel, just, playing whatever it may be within a scale.
Okay.
And sampling that. So it's a lot of sampling myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this something, maybe you may have already done this, but is this something that can be done live, or is it something that's strictly a recording project?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I played my first show with this music in December.
Okay.
And for that, it was, how was it? It was played with a controller. So I had a sampler, I had a tape cassette player, like, a little like Walkman, that was playing field recordings. What else did I have? That was kind of it. It was very minimal. I was mostly triggering samples and kind of messing with the pedals that were connected to the cassette player. So like that was one version of a live performance. Now with these two performances that I have coming up, I have a performance on February 24th for Space Doxa at Graffiti Gallery. Yeah, that'll be.
That's a perfect setting for what you're doing. I think that there's so many like just kind of out of the box creative ideas happening at those things.
Yeah, and it's just like such a wide open giant space, and my work is so reverby and echoey. So for these shows, and I've got another one at Handsome Daughter in March, but I'm actually going to play lap steel live, which like makes me shit myself to think that I have to do that. And so those performances will be a combination of what I had done before in December with a lot of triggering samples and playing lap steel.
Okay. So are they like, is the performance of a piece going to be fairly different live than it is on the recording? Like, I guess how true to the recordings can you get, or do you even want to do that? Like, is that even something you're going for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wonder how other like noise or ambient artists approach that, because it's kind of really hard.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Yeah,
recreate something. Like it'll never be the way it was when it was recorded, but I'm like reverse engineering basically a couple of songs that were on the tape to be playable live.
Okay.
I'm like going into the stems and like all of the bits and pieces of the recorded tracks and like what the fuck was I playing? Like, and sort of figuring out how that sample could be played live.
Okay.
So I'm taking samples of myself and trying to learn them again.
Well, and I think that's part of the appeal too, right? I mean, people are going there knowing that it's not going to be something that they heard on Bandcamp or whatever. It's going to be a performance that maybe resembles it, but it's just like necessarily going to be different because of the setting. I mean, for example, the Graffiti Gallery, that reverb's going to affect what the whole piece sounds like, and so it's kind of a cool position to be in, I think, where because it's just the music is malleable and it's not necessarily going to be what people expect.
For sure. Yeah, it's actually been really fun figuring out how to play these songs live. The song on the tape, OR7, that's kind of what I would call a single.
Okay.
It's like the featured track in my mind off of that tape. and being able to play some semblance of that live is incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm thrilled.
Well, what makes that one stand out to you as a single? Because I mean, it's sort of a hard. There's not necessarily a hook on any of these tracks. You know what I mean? So I mean, what are you focusing on as the person who created it, as far as like what makes that one stand out as the sort of the track to show people or that you want to highlight?
Oh, that's such a sweet question because it makes me think of where the beginnings of this tape, this release started.
Okay.
And that was such a special time. It was in the summertime, August of 2023, so not very long ago. I was at a cabin around my birthday, and I was messing around with music stuff. I always bring my gear when I leave the city. I never leave home without music gear. I need to bring it out to the country.
It's a good plan. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the only place for me to make productive music. And OR7, the beginnings of it anyway, were made there. And I didn't really know what I was doing. Like, I didn't really have a direction or like a real intent. It just sort of happened. And I was playing with these samples of coyotes yipping. Like,
cool.
That's what the sort of like twinkly, weird yipping is in that track. It's just many layers of a family of coyotes
Cool.
screaming their heads off. So I was playing with that and playing with some electronic instruments. Like, I was mostly like MIDI stuff because I didn't have all my gear. And yeah, it was just the first song that I wrote for that release. It was the impetus for the release.
Cool.
And also OR7, maybe this is a great spot to start talking about wolves.
Sure. Let's hear it. Let's talk about wolves.
So we'll probably have to go backtrack a little bit, but about like why this is even a thing. But OR7 was a real wolf that lived in sort of like Northern California, southwestern Oregon, sort of around that area.
Okay.
For a time in the mid aughts to I think like 2012 or so. I don't know when he died, but he is a very important, I won't say character, but his life is followed very closely in a book that is very important to this work. And so that song was sort of like my ode to this weirdly legendary animal.
Okay.
And yeah, it was very special to me.
I think you said earlier that you're definitely not the only person who is doing ambient country, but you may be the only person doing wolf inspired ambient country. Like I don't know if that's a subgenre that exists yet, but you may have just started with. I'm not sure.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, I think people have this really funny ick when it comes to people who are really into animals, especially when it's like a canine animal. It's like foxes or wolves or dogs.
Yeah.
If you have like a serious affinity for animals in that way, people think you're a furry. Or like think you're a furry, or think like there's something weird about this. Like, why is this such a prevalent motif? But it's really not like that.
Well, I think that maybe wolves and foxes in particular, because dogs, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, I have a dog. A lot of people have dogs and they love their dogs and they're very into their dogs. But yeah, once you start getting to sort of the wild versions of that, I think people maybe are a little bit more hesitant to be, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm fine with like coming up against that because it's not really about me. It's not about my affinity for them. I think they're really cool animals, but it's not about like my specific identification with this animal. I think it's really interesting the way that people can identify with animals. And in fact, that is a huge part of the work. But my initial interest in wolves actually came from writing a script for a werewolf movie.
Cool.
Yeah, and in beginning to write it, I realized that I didn't know enough about wolves or about werewolves as they've been depicted throughout film history and werewolf lore and like all of the different ways that you can approach it. So I just dove deep into researching, the origins of certain myths, folklores, and then it got to, you know, contemporary relationships with animals and the history of the wolf.
Okay.
And what an interesting history that is.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's cool. I think that a lot of people, especially with something like the werewolf, as a like pop culture sort of character, people don't really necessarily dig too far into the animal part of it. They go into like they go maybe to like the 50s, the 40s, the Lon Chaney Wolfman movie, and that's about the starting point, right? And it's obviously not that I'm a werewolf expert myself at all, but there's obviously centuries and centuries of lore and history and everything behind those stories, and then there's also all of the kind of relationship humans have with wolves on top of all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially, I mean, my research for this project, what was a werewolf movie, what will maybe one day be a werewolf movie, but
Okay.
is right now this project. Um, it's all about, North American wolves and their history and the role that they played in colonization and the way that colonization shaped its history
Okay.
and how many parallels can be drawn between, you know, oh, there's so much there. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy.
Yeah, the wolf. We'll have to do a wolf episode or something. You should start a wolf. You should start a wolf podcast and just. I'm
Oh
sure that those are probably out there.
God.
I'm sure there's someone is a
Oh,
wolf fan, and yeah.
if people didn't think I was a furry before, then
Well, if people want to hear this, what's? I mean, I know you have this out on tape, and it's got to be, what I assume, a limited run of tapes, right? I mean, some that label seems to put out very short runs of stuff in general.
yeah, so the first batch sold out. I just got a bunch. I got 20. So if anyone wants a tape, they can get in touch with me on Instagram or through Brett, but I think mostly me right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that this week. I'll
Mm.
send you a message. But where can people hear it otherwise? I mean, is it on? Is this the kind of thing that you have on all those streaming services that people usually use for music, or is it strictly physical and then Bandcamp or whatever?
Yeah, it's on everything. It
Got
should be
it.
on Apple Music, Spotify. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool, cool. And then as far as those shows you have coming up, the good thing about this being a podcast is someone could hear it the day it comes out, and then those shows are imminent, or they could hear it, a year from now. And by then, you may have more tapes out. You may have a whole bunch of shows happening. What's the best way to sort of keep in touch with what you're up to and find out about future releases and shows and that kind of thing?
Great question. Because right now, I mean, it's Instagram right now, but I feel like a divestment from that platform is pretty imminent for me. I think I'm gonna I'm gonna start a fucking newsletter. I'm over Instagram. I think I want to do emails,
I think
but
those
for
work.
now it's Instagram.
I think and people actually respond well to emails because they're so not used to getting them anymore. It's been so long that social media has just taken over everything. So it's that might be the solution.
I think so.
Awesome. And then, do you want to just plug those shows coming up? The Space Doxa one, and then you have one at the Daughter. You said.
Yeah, I want to be able to say who I'm performing with, so I'm just going to open my phone
Sure.
because I have a terrible memory and I also am terrible at pronouncing things. Okay, so on February 24th, I am doing a show at Graffiti Gallery for the Space Doxa series curated by Greg Hannock. I'm playing with DJ Conjo. Oh gosh, I can't say this person's name. Oh, I'm just going to say AD, Adethomide, I guess.
Oh yeah, I've had him on my show twice, and I can't pronounce it either. So, yeah, it's
Okay,
like
I'll have to ask him.
a diethylamide. I can't even spell it. His music is cool, but
Music is
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Right
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Yeah, and DJ Salinger, which is Greg Hannock. And on March 9th, I am playing at the Handsome Daughter with Pure Pulp, which is Sam Sardi from Living Hours Ambient Project,
Oh,
and
cool.
Hazel Fogg, which is a new ambient project from Meth from Age of Self and other various
Like 30
loved
other bands. Yeah,
bands.
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. For the Space Doxa show, are you doing? Is there a visual element to that as well? Because a lot of those shows are kind of a multimedia sort of experience, right?
Yeah, when I was presented with that as a possibility, I was like, okay, I gotta really put something together because I don't know how often I'll have this opportunity. So
Yeah.
I'm trying. I'm hoping there is a lot of visual accompaniment to this work, so any opportunity I have to do that, I'm gonna try and jump on it.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense. It seems like as you've sort of been describing the whole time we've been talking, it has that imagery that would work with it, and the fact that it was written with a werewolf movie in mind and written with all of these visual elements in mind, it makes total sense that that would be a good place to showcase it.
For sure.
Awesome.